been 5 days since Rupert Lowe proposed that he and Nigel Farage set their differences aside and work together for the good of the country, and it seems that point 2 of his proposal, the reversal of mass immigration and the arrested decline of the white British population into a minority in their own country by 2063, seems to be the sticking point. It seems that Reform UK have engaged with the topic either by refusing to speak about demographic security, the basic precondition for any people in their territory to have a political system that represents their interests, to possess their own country, to give their name to their own culture. Or some supporters and media surrogates have been calling it racist, despite understanding the principle when it applies elsewhere. But we'll get to that in a moment. But first, this video is sponsored by Gold Bullion Partners. Use my affiliate link down in the description if you want to book your free consultation to invest in gold or silver. Gold Bullion Partners investments are exempt from CGT and VAT tax and are eligible for self-investment pension plan. They offer secure, allocated and segregated storage in London and Zurich, including for my American viewers, and for my viewers, they give you preferential storage if you use the affiliate link down in the description. Nice touch. Gold Bullion offers wholesale access to both supply and pricing, and they offer all customers a buyback guarantee. And for those of you who want all of my content ad-free going forwards, subscribe to my Substack for as little as £5 per month. That's also linked down in the description below. What can I say? I've got twins on the way and more mouths to feed. And the most egregious of these defamatory tracks came from Allister Heath, who has been the editor of the Sunday Telegraph since 2017, and has written about a bunch of other topics, including anti-white racism. So, according to Allister Heath, if you, like Rupert Lowe, say that the white British are going to be a minority by 2063, and this issue is unavoidable, by the way, for those of us with kids on the way, because those children, if born today, will be a minority in their own generation by 2031. They're already between 59 and 57% of all classrooms, and that trend is going downwards, especially in dense urban built-up areas like London, Luton, Leicester, Bradford. But if you say that, Allister Heath thinks that you are a repugnant white nationalist. But then he admits that anti-white racism is real, and there'll be more Henry Novaks until it's crushed. Right, so demographic change and an anti-white state has led to a place where your daughters will be abused and your sons murdered while the state holds their hands behind their back because they're white. But if you say the very same thing about the white population more broadly, if you say this same white British population is becoming a minority as well as being hated and marginalised by their own country, if you make that observation, suddenly you're as racist as the anti-white racist state that hates white people. So the state that is trying to turn them into a minority via its immigration policy is anti-white, but you are a racist if you say you don't want to be a white minority. Work that one out. Allister Heath seems to have not to. Anyway, this piece is just odious. It's time to call out Rupert Lowe, the leader of Restore, a deluded egoist who is toxifying British politics, fanning the fires of racial and religious strife, and risks handing permanent power to Andy Burnham's leftist revolutionaries. Bear in mind, it was the Tories, which Allister Heath supports, and he says so in this article, that accelerated this demographic decline with the Boris wave. 6 million immigrants in 6 years, mainly from the third world, from culturally incompatible nations which have disproportionately higher levels of children in our country. So driving that demographic nail into our coffin. Heath complains that Lowe has released a video demanding Nigel Farage adopt Restore's agenda. No, he didn't. He says we can work together if we agree on these things. And funnily enough, Nigel Farage released a Substack about a month or so ago on Henry Novak, saying that if we're not careful, the white British will be a minority by 2063, a prediction which came from Matt Goodwin, who is in Reform, who doesn't like Restore, and is still to this day urging them not to make the pact, despite agreeing on this. So it's conspicuous that Nigel Farage himself hasn't denounced Rupert Lowe for the language of demographic security. He's just studiously avoided it. Though again, we won't be able to studiously avoid that problem, and neither will our children in the coming decades. It's only people like Allister Heath who say that it's reprehensible. But it's not reprehensible for other people, though. We'll get to that in a moment. Anyway, he says, if Farage, weakened by funding controversies, refuses Restore, will continue to stand kamikaze candidates, even if that keeps Labour in power. Oh, it's the old splitting the vote accusation. All right, well, if you don't want to split the vote, why don't we unify them? If we agree on everything? No? Oh, it's because you're not actually concerned about power, you're not concerned about winning, you're concerned about looking respectable to your North London dinner parties with Fraser Nelson, who wants to ethnocidally deny that we even exist as a distinct ethnic group in our country, and that we have a claim over said country. And Heath reassures us it isn't racist to want far less immigration. How about basically none? Or to kick out illegal immigrants, or to bid farewell to legal immigrants who refuse to integrate, are stuck on handouts, or break the law, or even under certain circumstances strip criminals or terrorists of their citizenship. That's all restore policy. So, restore policy, legitimate in Allister Heath's eyes, good to know. It is legitimate to worry about the scale of demographic change, the challenge of absorbing large numbers of Muslim migrants, or to fear a clash of civilizations. Right. It's legitimate to worry about it but not do anything about it, is what he's saying. It's legitimate to worry about the challenge of absorbing large numbers of Muslim migrants. How about we just circumvent this challenge and not absorb them? Instead, we repel them. They can go to any of the 50 or so Muslim countries already in existence that cater to their interests, their ethnic group, and their religion, rather than ruining ours and turning it into some favela or third world slum. And to fear a clash of civilizations, I don't fear it, it's happening. Weirdly enough, there are countries around the world that are sending their murderers and rapists to us and are basically sanctioning people smuggling networks that operate through Islamic finance and market Britain as an open-air brothel. Use our women and girls filmed without their consent to entice potential customers, third world men. And so, very soon, Britain's going to look like the invasion of that Spanish territory just off the coast of Morocco. It's happening. And so to worry about it, well past that point, yeah. Allister writes, Restore goes further than any of these increasingly mainstream right-wing positions. Okay, how are they increasingly mainstream? It's because Restore has dragged them to that position. Or, perhaps more charitably, as Douglas Murray frequently did, Restore has swept the minds and allowed the other parties who are more risk-averse to occupy that space behind them. Which is why Zia Youssef and Nigel Farage are just lifting their rhetoric straight from the pages of Harrison Pitt's mass deportations papers. Today, Zia Youssef did a press conference saying he will fine and imprison the bosses of firms like Deliveroo, Uber Eats and Just Eats if they continue to hire illegal migrants. Again, that's directly in the Restore Britain deportation paper that was published before they were a party. The mass deportation coalition in America that's currently trying to press President Trump into fulfilling his campaign promise, which he's backed off of, mass deportations, modelled themselves on Harrison Pitt's paper. So Restore Britain has, even Reform acknowledged this, made significant rhetorical gains to the benefit of the other parties. Reform, or some therein, it's not quite a unified front these days, are actually thankful for some of the things that Restore has allowed them to say. But no, he says, in my opinion, Lowe veers frequently into bigotry. I'll give 3 examples. There are others. Lowe appears to be obsessed with race, not merely immigration. He states in his video that white Britons will become a minority by 2063, a development he describes as demographic vandalism, and that cannot be allowed to happen. Yes, it's a census category, and it's describing the English, Scottish, Welsh and Irish, those who are natives to this land with nowhere else to go. It is a distinct, discrete demographic category that shows up in government documents and academic research. If you're going to throw your hands in the sky and scream, why are you saying white? Well, one, you are saying that, well, what about these other people of ethnic heritage? Are they British too? I mean, the fact that you're having to ask the question means that you acknowledge there's something different about them to white Britons, which means you acknowledge their genetic and ancestral differences. And also, if you're having to say, well, are these people British? It's like, well, you're not asking me if I'm British because you know I'm an Englishman with a bit of Irish ancestry thrown in. Maybe some French a few generations ago for my sins. But if you're asking, is Mark Ghanaian, mate, British? It's like, well, no, he's Ghanaian. You've just said it. Doesn't mean he's a bad guy. But you can acknowledge this difference. So why are we playing this tiresome game of where the answer to the question is contained within the question? It's just to deflect and deny and obfuscate the conversation to deprive us of an exclusive claim to possessing our own country and territory. And if you do that, well, I would call you subversive, but actually this article is so bad, I think it's just too stupid to be subversive instead. He also complains in an inflammatory intervention on Talk TV. Charlie Downs said that ensuring demographic security for the white British people is a Restore priority. In 2025, 53% of births in England and Wales were to white British mothers. Downs described such figures as an existential threat to our nation. Imagine your reaction to this despicable, vile slur if you're the parent of an ethnic minority child or in a mixed-race relationship. Okay, but culture correlates closely with ethnicity. There are very few people that break from their inherited civilization, the culture of their parents, the way of life that is not intuitive to them, and adopts a new civilization. There are a very small number of people that can and do that. Now, those are very nice people. It doesn't mean everyone has to be rounded up, put on a bus and a boat and a plane and sent back to somewhere they've never lived. But it does mean that most immigrants and the descendants of immigrants do not leave their cultural baggage at the airport. And so that means demographic change tracks with cultural change. And if you would like our culture to persist, if you would like our civilization to have continuity, if you would like our country to be peaceful and prosperous and something recognizable to both our ancestors and our children, that means you need to arrest these demographic developments. That does mean that Britain needs to be majority white British. 90 to 95%. You can have those stable demographic foundations, and then you can have some friends of foreign heritage, some adopted family members from culturally proximate civilizations who can live here in peace. Anglophiles, if you will. But I guarantee that those people would also agree that our demographic foundations should be so secure that they can live in a Britain populated by British people. And of course they would want that if they want to come over and marry into the tribe or be surrounded by people whose culture they revere, whose history they love. So, actually, no, it's not obscene or racism or prejudice, as Allister says. It's not disgusting and should have no place in mainstream politics. It is the prerequisite, the guarantor for politics. This is the pre-political we that Roger Scruton spoke about. In order to engage in politics, the art of collective bargaining and representation, you need to know who you represent. And that we cannot encompass everyone because the category is so expansive, it has no descriptive power anymore. If the we you seek to represent is all mankind, or everyone from everywhere who's just a Briton in waiting, then you're not describing anything. By saying British, I don't know the content of the category that you are talking about. Instead, when we say British, we mean, and have throughout almost all of our history, until some brief confusion after the Second World War to now, we have meant English, Scottish, Welsh, and Irish, insofar as the British Isles, Ulsterman if you want to talk about the United Kingdom. And that's fine. Doesn't mean we have to be mean to everyone else. It actually means that we know who possesses the country, who has a primary claim to it, who should be represented in their politics, in whose interests politicians should act. But instead, Allister Heath thinks this is evil and reprehensible. Again, he doesn't think about that in other contexts, but we'll get to that in a moment. You can agree he allows us, as many non-white British citizens do, that there has been too much immigration, but the aim must now be to build a patriotic, integrated, colourblind, non-woke society, not to weaponise the horrors of white nationalism or to pit white Brits against their non-white fellow citizens. Okay, please name me one successful, patriotic, integrated, colourblind, non-woke society. Name one. No? Then it's utopian thinking. Then it's purely a luxury belief. You are living in the dream realm of hypotheticals, and you might not think that you have to deal with these consequences, Allister, but I tell you who does. People who get buses or trains. People whose grandparents have been cleared out of their ancestral areas, like East London, including mine. Young men who are precluded from getting jobs because of DEI hiring practices, or just the anti-white ethnic prejudice of the existing managers of given systems who will give jobs in the public and private sector to their own ethnic kin, countrymen, or co-religionists. Or perhaps you might understand the problem if you were a young white woman just going out on a night out with her friends and trying to leave a club in, I don't know, London, Cardiff, Exeter even, and people are saying, whoa, hang on a minute, Exeter, that's quite a bougie town, on you being a bit drastic, it's not there yet. No, those are all examples that I'm giving of when asylum seekers, illegal migrants, foreign men from the third world have waited outside clubs for drunk girls to prey on them and sexually abuse them. So that's happening. It might not be happening to you, Allister, or your family, because you might get black cabs everywhere, because you might live in a leafy suburb, because you're wealthy and insulated from the problem. But it is happening. It's not a hypothetical. And what is a hypothetical that we can't afford to engage in is this myth of integration. And by integration, by the way, he just means obeying the law and paying tax, regardless of your religion and your moral system. How are you meant to have a cohesive civilization if people believe fundamentally incompatible things to you? if your default assumption about someone is not that they basically think like you and you can trust them. Because the friction in the system, the enforcement costs that come from forcing all these people from all over the world who believe completely different things, who don't like each other very much, to get along, and to rationally subscribe to being patriotic for a place that is not the land of their ancestors. Do you know how expensive and difficult and frankly impossible that will be? No, you haven't had to think about it, because instead you've put that to the back of your mind so that you don't get called a racist by your friends at posh London dinner parties. Inexcusable. Pathetic. In fact, I concur with Charlie Downs here when he screenshotted this bit, and he said, "I make no apology for demanding demographic security for my people in our own homeland." Allister Heath, editor of the Sunday Telegraph, supposedly Britain's foremost right-wing newspaper, calls that despicable, vile racism. I belong to a generation for whom such slurs have no meaning. They were used to cover up the Pakistani grooming gangs, after all. Anyone who still uses the term racism unironically now has no moral legitimacy. You're in the same class as people from The Guardian or the Labour Party who would like to dismiss, out of hand, the violent consequences of mass migration and multiculturalism. If you think that word has any shared definition in civilization now, you profoundly misunderstand what time it is. Anyway, Downs continues, "If not wanting my children and grandchildren to grow up in a Lebanon-style sectarian nightmare makes me racist, so be it." Quite. Let's be clear, Allister Heath. You're a traitor to the British people, an agent of the anti-white establishment, and your pathetic slurs mean nothing. You will be remembered as among those complicit in the destruction of Britain, and your descendants will be ashamed to bear your name. As I said, patriot, and Musk concurs. Heath is a traitor. Heath doesn't stop, though, and don't worry, I'll bring this to an end very soon. He then complains that Rupert Lowe insinuated that Muslims aren't British. I mean, they're not. Unless you're a ginger convert, in which case, go find something more productive to do. You don't have British ancestry, and you hold a religion which is fundamentally incompatible and alien to our civilization and our culture. Not least of all, because the reason that British people are the way they are is because the first Archbishop of Canterbury banned cousin marriage and it was ratified by the Catholic Church. And if you read Alan Macfarlane's Origins of English Individualism, that created our nuclearized family units, our small family farm holdings, our high trust culture, our entrepreneurialism, our manners, our morals, and our attitude towards free enterprise. So, no, Islam is not British, and neither are Sajid Javid, Shabana Mahmood, and, he says, Zia Yusuf. Zia Yusuf is a Sri Lankan Muslim. Now, he might well be one of these Anglophile immigrants, descendants of immigrants, who would like to see the British people maintain control of Britain. He hasn't put it in such clear terms, but he is pretty sound on immigration policy. Shabana Mahmood is a Pakistani woman who says that Islam is the reason she's called to public service and is currently creating new safe and legal routes for migrants from Pakistan, Eritrea, Sudan, Somalia, Afghanistan, and Allister Heath's very own dreaded Palestine to come into the country and live at taxpayers' expense. And then Sajid Javid, when confronted with the idea, by Nigel Farage actually, that Britain's major cities, according to the 2021 census, are minority white British, he said, so what? Completely indifferent to our demographic disappearance. Absolute enemy. Sajid Javid, by the way, was the Home Secretary when Shabir Ahmed and a bunch of other Rochdale grooming gang perpetrators were available to be deported to Pakistan with some careful negotiation, and he decided not to. He just so happens to be a Pakistani man born and raised in Rochdale, whose brother is now leading immigration at the Home Office. Anyway, he also says it's despicable and puts Lowe beyond the pale. He wants to make it impossible for Jews or Muslims, however well established, however much they love Britain, however diligently they've served our country, more Muslims joined ISIS than the armed forces, by the way, including in the military, to practice privately their religion in Britain for the first time in 370 years. Okay, well, sorry, we actually don't have to accommodate foreign religions if we don't want to. Like, I'm not going out my way to punch at Jews. I've got Jewish friends, some of whom, again, have joked that they'd rather go vegetarian and give up kosher if it meant that you could get rid of Muslims from Britain. But actually, if you look at the approval rating among the public about Islam, well, Dame Sarah Khan is frightened that a majority of the public now think that diversity is destroying British identity. And if you look at Reform voters, to whom Allister Heath seems to be making his appeal, about 80 to 90% think that Muslims can never actually be British. They can't integrate. And that Islam is fundamentally incompatible with British culture. So, sorry, everyone's ears are kind of clogged up here regarding your message. He also then does the most painful, mid-witted thing, which is to say that kosher slaughter is more British than fish and chips, and then he tries to argue that cousin marriage is actually kind of British because Queen Victoria married Prince Albert. Oh well, I have found an exception to your rule, therefore, open the borders to infinity Bamalians. It's so tiresome. It's... Again, I would call it subversive if it wasn't so stupid. Alice's main contention is, what counts is culture and allegiance, not ethnic background. One can be fully British, even if Britain isn't one's ancestral homeland. Why does this need restating? What fresh hell are we entering? That would be the fresh hell that you and your demographic blind policies and the politicians you've supported in the Conservative Party, Allister, have created. It turns out that when our demographic back is against the wall, and people actually have to live around the consequences of demographic change, then their identity gains a new salience. This is what Ernest Gellner wrote about nationalism. He wasn't even a nationalist. He said that nationalism is a sentiment and a principle. The principle is that nations, peoples, ethnic groups, should possess their own territory, should have complete self-determination, sovereignty, and decide the fate for their own people so that they can bequeath patrimony to their descendants. And the sentiment is provoked if this principle is challenged. You get more nationalism the more a people and their collective interests are under threat. You get less nationalism, or less of a need for it, if they're just sort of living among one another and they can have banter and disputes in their regional dialects with their local identities over football teams or Christian denominations, especially in the case of Britain. So the fresh hell that Allister Heath is complaining about is one that he and his friends have created for Britain. And it's one that he isn't keen to get us out of, because none of the things that he suggests are possible, desirable, or will solve the problem. In fact, he complains that the Groyperification, a descent into rabid, very online conspiratorial populism, if it is the future of the British right, as it sometimes looks to be that of the Republican Party, our country is finished. Angry voters want change, but overwhelmingly reject racism and extremism. Again, the majority of Reform UK voters think that you have to be born British with British ancestry to be British, and they think that Britain is an ethnic community, not a collection of random people who subscribe to British values that Michael Gove can conveniently list on 5 fingers, all of which can be found in any liberal post-national country. So, if not voting for Restore Britain, or not voting for a Restore and Reform Pact, or not presumably voting for a Reform UK that actually is bolder on demographic questions, as its own voters want, is the answer. What is the answer that Allister Heath proposes? Farage and Kemi Badenoch must continue to build multiracial, multi-religious, small c conservative coalitions, and reject Lowe's repugnant dance with white nationalism and religious discrimination. If a deal is to be done, it will be between the Tories and Reform. Well, there you go! This entire thing is an op to breathe life back into the treacherous Conservative Party. No, no thanks, we never want them near government again. They ruin the country. Frankly, they should be in prison rather than in Parliament. But Allister Heath thinks that we should give the Boris Waves administrators another go on the political carousel. I don't. Do you? So therefore, anytime these people use the word racist, it is concealing a political agenda that is only achieved if they ruin your reputation and get you to resign from public life. Well, if we don't cancel our own for these bogus claims, nobody will. And it turns out, funnily enough, that lots of the Telegraph's readers aren't having it either. Because when Allister Heath posted this piece to his Twitter, as Rupert Lowe says, it's not going how he hoped. Basil the Great decided to screenshot some of these comments. Does anyone else think that these comments weren't what the woke old Tory boy Allister was expecting? Mr. Heath should resign from the Telegraph for such lowball, cheap shot hit piece on Rupert Lowe. Calling someone you disagree with racist is the vile method of character assassination perfected by the repugnant left. It's also seemingly what got Anne Widdecombe and Charlie Kirk killed, by the way. It automatically tells me Heath has no argument worth listening to. Isn't that a Margaret Thatcher quote? It might be apocryphally assigned. Keep up this, Daily Telegraph, and you'll have one less subscriber. They are just like posting enough coal to get us out of our energy deficit at the moment. I mean, they did the attack on me, if you remember correctly, trying to get me cancelled from Buy Me a Coffee. They've released multiple hit pieces on Rupert Lowe now. And then there was a piece the other day saying, British Muslims have a lot to teach the right. And actually, no. Muslims are very conservative about their own family, their own clan, their own religion, their own ethnic group, and the Ummah. It is not a universal principle. That it does not translate to us. The only thing that we can learn from them is we have to take our own side because they won't take theirs. But Allister Heath says, well, God, no, you can't take your own side. You can't notice that, for example, the Conservative Party, the Labour Party, even Reform, have Jewish groups, are courting the Muslim vote, take photos with Sikhs, pander to immigrant communities. But God forbid the white British have a consciousness and interests of their own. God forbid the actual native people that pay for everything in this country, who build it, who have inherited it, who pass it on to their children with love and care. God forbid that they're put first in their own country. And so the comments were just an absolute bloodbath. There were hundreds of thousands of comments chewing him out for this. And he deserves it. And he also deserves it because, as my friend Harrison Pitt pointed out, Allister Heath is an ethnonationalist, just not for the UK. Allister Heath believes in blood and soil nationalism for Israel, but for some reason that doesn't translate to Britain. He wrote in The Jewish Voice, and by the way, Allister Heath is Gentile, as is, weirdly enough, Matthias Dopfner, the new owner of the Telegraph, who described himself as a goy and a Zionist. And it's weird because, goy is the derogatory one, as much as we, use it in jokes these days. It's not a flattering term, so to refer to yourself as that, bit strange. He also said on stage to Freddie Sayers, who, hates my guts, at ARC, that his number one goal is to turn the Telegraph into an activist outlet that is aggressively against anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. So, okay, seems like your animating principle here is both to secure a country that is created by and for Jewish people, fine, seems like they need one, but it also is to deny one for us. In fact, I think it was Morgoth who wrote under Allister Heath's post that the ostensible right, the establishment right, like the Telegraph these days, save a couple of contributors like Alison Pearson, their purpose is to hold our heads under the water as we become demographically drowned. The left turns on the tap, and the establishment right, the Tories, the Telegraph, they are the ones that are waterboarding us with the tide of people brought into our country to dispossess us of it. And you know what? We're just not having it anymore. And we're also just not having the double standard, because Allister Heath can say all he likes. Once you admit Israel's survival isn't just impressive, but divine, everything changes. But then say it's repugnant for us to have our own country. He can well say that, but it doesn't mean I have to listen to that double standard. It doesn't mean I have to accept that Israel gets something that's successful, divine even, according to Allister Heath, but that I have to deprive myself and my children of that. If it works for Israel, it's good enough for us, right? Why not? Allister Heath's written about this for quite a while, by the way, including for the Telegraph. He says, I'm a Zionist, dear reader, and I cannot understand how any mainstream politician in Britain today could not be. Zionism involves accepting a simple proposition. The Jewish people should have their own country in the historic land of Israel, from where they were expelled all those years ago. Zionism is not a program for government. It is neither left-wing or right-wing, apart from agreeing that there should be Jewish national self-determination in a viable, secure homeland in Israel. Zionists disagree on everything else, including on where borders should be drawn. Okay, can we just substitute some words out from that sentence? For example, I'm a British nationalist, dear reader, and I cannot understand how any mainstream politician in Britain today could not be. I think that makes a lot more sense given it's about Britain, not about Israel. I mean, you can like Israel if you like, but you shouldn't be forced as a politician to take positive or negative stances on foreign countries. You can have whatever opinion of whatever people and country you like, except it is suicidal to refuse to guarantee your own people's demographic security in your own country. Or, nationalism involves accepting a simple proposition. The British people should have their own country in the British Isles, from where they risk expulsion in 2063. Nationalism is not a program for government. It is neither left-wing or right-wing. Apart from agreeing there should be a British national self-determination in a viable, secure homeland in the British Isles. See how simple and reasonable that is? For some reason, that cannot be countenanced by Allister Heath and some others, including, and it's frustrating to say, Julia Hartley Brewer. Julia Hartley Brewer is someone who I've had positive interactions with in the past. I used to appear on her talk radio show, on Talk TV, before I got banned conspicuously after Private Eye lobbied to have me prevented from going on the station. And she decided to do a debate with Charlie Downs about the principle of demographic security, and it's frustrating and obstinate, and it's because in another time and place, in the Middle East, in Israel, Julia accepts these premises. And so, and I'm not being bad faith here, because I've always gotten along with Julia, if Julia believes that Israel would cease to be Israel if it were no longer majority Jew, why would Britain continue to be Britain if it ceased to be majority British? We'll watch this little segment and just pause and criticise the arguments. But at this point, a lot of this rhetoric just needs to be stepped over. A lot of the, well, Queen Victoria married her cousin. Well, Britain has always been religiously pluralistic. Well, we're actually a nation of immigrants because of the Vikings and the Romans and the Normans, don't you know? Well, if you say that the English, Scottish, Welsh and Irish are the only British people, you're a racist. All of this just needs to be gotten past. Who cares? And I tell you what, they don't care either. Because Allister Heath, I'm willing to bet, doesn't want to live in any other country other than Britain. Or allow me to modify that. He doesn't want to live in non-British areas of Britain. When was the last time Allister Heath took a trip to Luton, Leicester, Birmingham, Bradford, bad parts of Manchester, or London? When was the last time that Allister Heath saw and spoke to the people in Blackburn who have to tolerate no-go areas and their sons being attacked by Pakistani gangs, driving around their neighbourhoods at all hours of the night, high on balloons, doing drugs, preying on their daughters, as detailed in Ed Hussein's book Among the Mosques? When was the last time that Allister Heath was actually confronted with the consequences of demographic change? Does Julia Hartley Brewer live in a black majority area? I don't think she lives in Thamesmead or Erith. I doubt she gets the SL3 through Thamesmead or the SL5, I think it is, through Plumstead. I have. It's not good. It's not safe. So, you can pretend to not notice a difference between these people all you like. But your revealed preferences, your lived experience even, shows that you do. And that you would actually prefer to live in a Britain that is comprised of the demographics that you had as a child and that we have never known. But instead, you're denying us getting back there because you don't want to get called mean names. And so you are essentially digging our demographic grave. One that we will have to watch our own children be lowered into. Anyway, let's crack on with this video.
Many of your colleagues have routinely failed to mention one of the most important ones, I would say the most important one, which is demographic security for the white British people. We're going to become a minority in this country within the next 40 years on present demographic trends. In 2024, only 54% of live births were to white British mothers. This is an existential threat to our nation, and Reform have always denied this.
Because if the people of the nation disappear, the nation ceases to be, Julia. If the people after whom the country and the culture is named and to who it belongs no longer exist, then the country and culture no longer exists. This is a simple concept that you understand.
Let me give you a bit more detail around why I'm saying why. I think an awful lot of people in this country, and actually of all skin colours, share a concern about the major demographic changes in this country in terms of people coming from other countries, not speaking our language, not sharing our values of adherence to the law, and integrating, etc., etc. However, I don't think that's got anything to do with anyone's skin colour.
Skin colour is incidental. I mean, my granddad, it was an Englishman, a little bit of French in him, again, for his sins, but as soon as he would go to Egypt, he was tanned like an Arab. But England is his country. It is his inheritance. It is the place he is loyal to. And even if he were to go to anywhere else, like Egypt, he would be an Englishman and was recognised as such. And so, skin colour is a distraction. Skin colour is an accident. If every Englishman were turned blue overnight, it would not stop them being Englishmen. Instead, what we're talking about here is ancestry and inheritance, which weighs like a dead hand on the identities and consciences of other peoples, actually far more virulently than it does us sort of individualistic, take people as we meet them, English people, right? And I think Julia's mannerisms here, her cognitive dissonance with her ardent defense of Israel as a home by and for Jewish people. And again, I've met some Israelis that go, yeah, why wouldn't you just have what Israel has? It works for us. Like, why would your politicians want anything less for you? They're basically forcing you to like commit suicide, or they're killing you demographically with this. So it's just perplexing to other people. Anyway, what I think Julia was trying to do is be nice. That's it. Now, being nice shouldn't be prioritised over securing a future for our children. However, fortunately, it doesn't require us to be unduly cruel to people just because they have a different heritage. If they are this small minority of people that Julia is concerned about, then we can be nice to them and exclude the rest. And that will actually afford us the demographic security that we require. But also, I really don't like this constant dragging of the conversation off to, but what about the nice foreigners? What about this small constituency of hypothetically integrated model minorities that are basically as British as you? It's like, again, the locus of moral concern is never allowed to be situated in the native people themselves. I want a politics that takes my side, that is concerned about the success of my children. And constantly dragging the conversation off to, but what about nice foreigners that we shouldn't be mean to, completely obscures that point.
Why is that a threat to our country?
White British is a census classification
Yes,
used by the
I'm not disputing that.
Yes, so I'm not talking about skin colour, I'm talking about a census classification that includes...
You are talking about
English,
skin colour.
Scottish,
White.
Welsh and
The word
Irish.
white. It's a bit of a clue there.
Condescension really isn't needed. And yes, I don't understand why you're getting so hung up on the word white, because the census categorization, one, is a self-identifying marker, right? So you're already filtering for people that say, yes, I am white British, as in, like, they self-describe as this, so it's not a morally loaded term, and it just describes the English, Scottish, Welsh, and Irish. So this shouldn't be difficult. I don't want to accuse bad faith, but it is like, I think Morgoth came up with this term, playing the hatchling, acting in a debate as if you woke up yesterday to try to stall the conversation on basic definitions that become an impasse. The impasse seemingly to be a demographic security, which is why the overall Reform Restore deal has stalled. It's like that viral millennial woes tweet that applies to leftists who pretend not to understand and therefore make discourse impossible. Again, I'm not accusing Julia of bad faith, but this is really frustrating to watch, and we just don't have time for this. It's basically a bottleneck that we've reached at this point. Everyone who is confronted by this problem knows the problem. They know who the usual suspects and the culprits of these crimes are. They know they don't want to send their kids to a majority non-white school. They know they don't want to live in a non-white area. So do the people that pretend not to know about it. And instead, we've just got to play these word games with people that, much like the cops restraining Henry Novak, are tying one hand behind our back, calling us racist, as we bleed out nationally.
Well, I mean, it's a descriptive category used.
There is an ethnicity that is, English, white, British, white. Yes, I get that. And, going back many centuries, we are, and have been always until about 20 years ago, almost entirely a white nation. I get that. Why is there being fewer births to white British as opposed to, say, black British or brown British people? Why is that a threat to our country?
You just said it yourself, Julia. We have, throughout all of our history, let's say at least the last 1100 years since England became a unified kingdom under Athelstan, been a white British country. Again, skin colour, incidental. Though actually, you know what? It's not incidental. I'll change that. Because I would like Britain to be predominantly white, because I would like my children to be able to marry someone that they are attracted to. And overwhelmingly, white women tend to marry white men. Statistically, that's the case, despite what adverts might lead you to believe, despite what every bit of media is trying to push upon you. And it's totally fine to have a racial preference when you are trying to have children. Like, my wife has a Victorian complexion, and despite the very kind offers from some other women of other backgrounds while I was at university, I was never attracted to any women that weren't white. And that's fine. That's totally fine. And so it's totally fine for me to want to live in a majority white country so that my children can marry people that they're statistically most likely to be attracted to, just as it's natural and normal for other people of other nationalities and ethnicities to want to live in their own communities and marry within those communities, even when they're in my country. So, actually, it is important for the continuity of the culture, for Britain to be a recognisable place to both our ancestors and our offspring, for our children to be able to have families of their own, because they're statistically most likely to want to marry people that look proximate to them. So all of these things are important, and you just acknowledge they're important because they have been this way for thousands of years. People have expressed a preference for them to be this way. They have voted against it changing every time it's been on offer. But now we're supposed to play dumb and ask why it's a problem. Nope, not playing that game. Sorry.
Well, I think you've just answered that yourself, Julia, and that is that this is a very recent change in our nation's demographics, and an unwelcome change. It is a change that nobody ever voted for. In fact, since modern mass immigration began with the passing of the British Nationality Act in 1948, the British public have routinely voted against mass immigration, particularly from the Third World and former colonies.
But you're talking about immigration.
Julia, where do you think you get all the non-white people from if we've always been a white nation, if not immigration? And second and third generation immigrants often repeat the patterns of their parents. Look at the data from the Office for Budget Responsibility, the Netherlands, Denmark. Look at the incarceration rates. And sorry, Julia, we've discussed this on your show before, where I made a passing comment about black lads bumping through the tube barriers and not wanting to pay their bus fare, and you said, in your immediate experience, walking down the escalators from London Bridge to get home, you've seen that statistical pattern too. Why is it black boys, Julia? Is it just the culture? If that's the case, why does the same thing happen in America on the New York subway? Why is there a total lack of civilization in the countries that their ancestors came from? Is it just racism, slavery, and colonialism, like the left wing say? Or is there something essential to the way that these people live, behave, their culture, their attitude, and is it something intractable that we can't just bully into them with lectures on British values and having them here for long enough time for the magic soil to take effect? Sorry, I don't want to be belligerent, because again, I've always got on with Julia, and I'm happy to have a conversation with her about this. But it's just rudimentary at this point. Everyone knows the problem. Everyone knows where these people come from. Everyone knows that if they're making our quality of life worse, they don't need to be here. And more of them here means our country is left safe, secure, prosperous, and recognisable. And we just don't want it, I'm afraid.
That's because these are people that are coming from vastly different cultures, vastly different parts of the world, with whom we have very little shared history,
and many others.
And therefore,
Charlie, I and many others share those concerns, but you are conflating immigration and white. Yes, I realise that ethnically British people have been white, so they have been. However, there are an awful lot of people who we will live and work alongside, and children go to school alongside, who are not just British, as in they've got a British passport. Their parents were born here. They were born here. They know no other country. They consider themselves completely British. They are British.
Julia, if my parents were born in Japan and they married other English people, and I was born in Japan and I'd known no other country than Japan, would I be Japanese? No? Okay. So they're not British. It's fine. They, again, can be your friends. They can be nice people. They might even be your adopted family members. They might even marry your son or daughter. Right? But it doesn't make them British any more than I can become Japanese. Or if my parents, again, were English, they married other English people, they had me in Israel, and I'd only ever grown up in Israel, would I be Jewish? Nope. And no Israeli would recognize me as such, and that would be expected. Totally normal. And you recognize that distinction there, so why not here? If you want it for Israel, why not for us?
My grandparents on one side came from Ireland.
Okay, again, as someone whose nan comes from Ireland, Irish parents, born in Ireland, move over when she's a toddler, I'm so fucking tired of people going, well, I'm Irish, therefore every immigrant's fine. It's like, one, you're from the British Isles, you're native to the Isles. Two, you're genetically identical, as much as that'll piss off the IRA to say. And three, I happen to think that a bunch of English-speaking white Catholics that take like a 2-hour flight to get here, at most, are much easier to integrate and assimilate than people from Somalia, Eritrea, India, Pakistan, Africa. Weirdly enough, the closer a country is in genetic and cultural proximity, in skin complexion in many respects, just because there's less of a, oh, you're a different person. That's a barrier to get over. They're easier to integrate. And so, no, Irish people are not exactly the same as Somalians. And again, these are such anodyne points to point out. It's actually painful to make them. But I have to keep doing it because this channel is designed to counteract untenable mainstream narratives and lazy thinking, which dominates our politics.
I consider myself, my father was born here, my mother was born here, I was born here, I consider myself British. People with exactly the same credentials, but maybe their family came from the Caribbean or came from India, but they have lived here 2 or 3 generations. They shared language, values, beliefs, integrated, assimilated generations ago. Why is they having babies? Why is that a threat to this country?
So, Julia, you are here acting as a mouthpiece for the regime that currently governs this country.
Shut up, Charlie. You're embarrassing
because
yourself.
What you're
That wasn't necessary.
saying is exactly the same thing I've been hearing for my entire life, from primary school to secondary school to university, about what it means to be British, and that is that it is about shared values. This project
Why do you keep mentioning skin colour then?
As I've already said, and as you have acknowledged, white British is a census category used by the government to describe the English, Scottish, Welsh and Northern Irish. In other words, the native peoples of the British Isles.
Native, yes, I accept the word, I accept that, but why? But just, you know perfectly well, and with all due respect...
Sorry, and she's about to insult me again, which is catty and unnecessary. But if you accept that there are native peoples, then you would accept their claim to their land. And you would then accept that you know where non-white people come from if you say there are a native people. So you can't say immigration is disconnected from demographic change and birth rates represent no threat to demographic decline, but only immigration does. Because they're different people. So they have different assumptions. They change the culture and character of the country. So, again, frustrating.
I don't think you're as clever as you think you are, that you are constantly conflating the issue of immigration. I've just said to you, there is an issue with immigration and people who are not integrated, but I don't see what that's got to do with skin colour.
Also, just to point out, so Julia has frequently interviewed the head of the Henry Jackson Society and its researchers. Henry Jackson Society, I think it's 2 years ago now, put out a bit of research that said 52% of Muslims want to criminalise drawings of their Prophet Muhammad. The overwhelming majority is like 75%. Think that Hamas did nothing wrong, and a third want Britain to be Muslim and to have Sharia law replace common law. And that's most pronounced among second-generation, university-educated Muslim men born in Britain, aged 18 to 30. How's integration going?
What's your definition of integration, Julia?
People, I think I've already said it 2 or 3 times, but people who speak English fluently, who are completely sharing values, belief in the law, you know, equality under the law for women, gay people, I would suggest would be a key value now for the vast majority of Brits. You can marry who you want, you can worship who you want, you don't shut down to it. I would consider queuing, being nice, fairness. I would consider a lot of those to be British values and being integrated.
So
Fucking hell. Sorry, but that's... So, nobody, until David Cameron legalised gay marriage, is British. What a trite, untenable definition of what a British person is. So, Henry VIII, like, all of my ancestors, me, I'm actually not British because I don't support gay marriage. I don't support women's equality. Like, women should be treated with respect and consideration, but I don't think they're indistinguishable from men. Like, how does Julia Hartley Brewer reconcile the fact that Jeremy Corbyn doesn't really believe in all the things that she believes, but she still considers him British? Or Nick Griffin. What country's Nick Griffin from, Julia? You might think he's reprehensible. Clues in the name of his party. So, no, you cannot exclude people from consideration as British on ideological grounds. You can only exclude them on the grounds of inheritance. And you can talk about, actually, which religions do and don't belong in Britain, because we have a national religion, and Christianity has been inextricable from our family formation and the creation of the British people. It's not just where they go on a Sunday, it's how they've lived their lives for thousands of years until very recently that there is pockets of resurgence. So, to say, to be British is to say you can marry who you want and worship who you want. Sorry, is it a British value that we should hold Sikhism, Hinduism and Islam in the same esteem as our own religion? Because I certainly don't. No sincere believing Christian, or anyone of any other religion, by the way, does. They don't believe that all the religions are on equal footing to their own. Otherwise, they wouldn't believe in their own religion. They would just pick a mix from all of the traditions that are available to them, as if it's a multicultural buffet. Again, this is absurd. And Downs skewers her with one question here.
If all of the white British people currently in Britain were replaced by Pakistanis and Somalians, all of whom believed in queuing, would Britain be the same as it is now, or would it be different?
You just... OK, yeah, this is...
This is the key question, Julia.
No, it's not the key question.
Yes, it is the key question, because it's fucking happening, and you can't answer it. But no, actually, she can answer it. The answer is no. It's the same answer David Starkey gave to me. The intellectually honest answer is no. But for some reason, Julia won't give it. And I don't know why. If Israel were replaced with Pakistanis and Somalians, but they still had democracy, would it be Israel? No. And she knows it. So, sorry, this is just infuriating. We'll wrap up and finish. But the fact that these people won't answer this basic question actually shouldn't frustrate us. It should be clarifying. Because the moment that they commit themselves to such intellectual dishonesty, they can be stepped over. The same with all these other people that I've had this debate with before. Michael Gove, Danny Finkelstein, Catherine Burbleson, who decided to be really rude and mischaracterize me on my friend John Gillam's podcast the other day, despite being polite to me in person. Not appreciated. Come on. We can just ignore this because we just don't have time for it. It's the issue that will not go away. You're going to have to acknowledge it whether you like it or not. And if you don't, everyone else will. And at this point, the colourblind, liberal, meritocratic establishment right, who wants ethnonationalism for somewhere else, are the very cracked and thin dam holding back a tide of nativist sentiment that is built because of the policies that they endorsed that have vandalised our demographics to such an extent that we have become conscious of our own identity. And we need to take our own side.
You're making a glib point. You're the one who keeps saying it's about immigration, and then you keep talking about skin colour.
Because, Julia, the question is, are we a people or aren't we? And if we are, then the changing demographics do have a material effect on the future of the country.
Changing demographics do.
I don't want my children to grow up in some effing Lebanon, which is the situation we are rapidly hurtling towards with the massive demographic change that we're experiencing in this country. So, if we are to restore Britain and turn it into a country that is worth living in for young people and old people, and all British people, then restoring Britain's demographic security and recognising that the changing demographics is at the root of so much of what is wrong with our country today is absolutely essential. And as you have just demonstrated, yourself, others in the mainstream media, and indeed many of those in Reform of the Conservative Party are not prepared to have this conversation because
I'm perfectly prepared to. I'm not trying to shut down the conversation. I just thought I was going to have a conversation with you about restore and reform. We come back on again another time when we've got more time, when we will debate that in more detail.
Unfortunately, I think she is having a conversation about restore and reform, despite, again, some of Reform's leadership agreeing with Charlie on this issue. Unfortunately, it seems like the issue of our time, the demographic security of, yes, the British people, but in other countries too, Europeans in Europe and heritage Americans in America, Australians and Kiwis in New Zealand and Australia, it seems that this is the one issue that is of paramount importance, is the enabling conditions for us to have countries and a politics. It's the one issue that the gatekeepers are on our own side won't touch. And so, whether they like it or not, it's going to be the problem, even if they dare not name it. And I guess it's just up to us to keep talking about it until we solve it.